Hello and welcome to Spirit inSight. I'm Lorelei Drock, and today our guest, we welcome Kat Dunkle. She's a near-death experiencer and author of the book, Is It Safe to Die? About her transformation. Kat is also the founder of Customer Research Incorp, an internationally recognized marketing and research corporation. We're so happy to have you with us today, Kat. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for letting me come share. I always enjoy this. So
I am so happy to have you, and I know that I saw that you have, amazing responses to your book and that it's really transforming lives. So I just really wanted to talk with you. Can you tell us a little bit about like what led up to your near-death experience?
yes, well, I started off like a lot of us do. Well, maybe not, but in a home that was pretty much dysfunctional. My parents both drank very heavily. They weren't happy in their marriage, and we weren't allowed to do things that normal kids get to do. We couldn't talk to our father because my mom said he worked so hard and he needed to rest. And anyway, we couldn't chew our food too loud. We couldn't have friends over. Anything that would bother him was just forbidden. So that kind of dysfunctional family where we had nothing. And then we were transferred all over the United States with my dad's job. And I don't know if you've ever had to go into a new school, but walking into a classroom when you're a little kid and you don't know anybody and they're all staring at you is a horrible feeling. And then the curriculum would be different. Every 2 years, I'd go into a school, they would be studying something that I didn't have a clue what it was all about. And many times they just say, attend class and we'll pass you on to the next grade. So most of my education was self-taught and things that I could just pick up on my own. So life was just miserable, very happy. As a child, I pretty much believed in God. I think most kids do, whether you're just taught that way through society. And so I kind of did believe in God, but in my teen years, I started becoming rebellious, which a lot of teenagers do just on normal circumstances, which you're in a dysfunctional family, it seems to be more prevalent. And so I was the wild child and did a lot of things I probably shouldn't do. And it was like, I just at that time started doubting, did God really exist? Then I had a dear friend that was in a car wreck and died. And that was the first time I'd ever been to a funeral or had seen anybody that I really know die. And I looked down at him in the coffin and it was just such a shock. I thought, he's not really there. He's just a plastic doll. It's not really Stephen. And then I started wondering about what happens to me when I die. And I started questioning. I went to every church I could even imagine. I went to anything that had anything to do with the afterlife. Nobody could say anything that actually resonated with me or that I could believe in. And so I just stopped believing in God. I didn't go to church. I didn't have any desire to learn about God. So that was pretty much how I lived. And then I had jumped into a really bad marriage by the time I was 17. And by the time I was 20, I had two small little boys and was so miserable. I didn't love my husband at all. It was he was drunk all the time, abusive. So one night I walked out, we were in Kansas City at the time, and I looked at this beautiful starry sky and I thought, has to be something up there. And so I cried out, I said, God, if you're really there, if you just give me 1 year to know what it's like to feel love and to be able to love somebody else, because I had never, ever felt that in my life. Well, I picked up my boys one day and got an old beat up car and drove from Kansas City to Seattle, Washington, and ended up in government housing, which were just units made from World War II that were little shacks, but it was our own. And I was happy to be free. Boys and I didn't have furniture. We didn't have really food to eat. So we would lay in our sleeping bags on the floor, and our gas heater that heated our unit had a little pilot light, and we would lay down there and pretend that we were camping. And boys just absolutely loved that, and they loved running through the house playing games because they couldn't break anything. And we'd go to the library and go feed the ducks, and we were happy. I got a good job, and for women back in the 60s, that was not, we were not paid well. It doesn't matter if we were the head of a household. It was the men that got the jobs with the money. And so although I worked really hard and I had a really beautiful grandma type lady to watch the boys, the money just wasn't there. So we still lived in really severe poverty. But again, like I said, I was free and I was happy. So that was good. Well, then a lady that I worked with told me one day, she came in and she said, I met the man you're going to marry. I told him all about you, and you're going to marry this man. And I was upset. I said, I don't want to have anything to do with men. Trust me, I'm happy now. I don't want anything to do with that. Well, that night, this man called. His name was Don, and he just had the most pleasant, wonderful voice, and we talked, and we went out the next night, and the next night, and on the 27th day, we were sitting in a restaurant, and a man that Don worked with came stumbling in, so drunk he couldn't even stand up, and he came over and leaned over the table, and he said, you two belong to each other. You need to get married, and what would it take for you to get married? And Don, I mean, listen, this man had owned his own home. He owned a really nice car. He had a really good job. He loved my sons. He was so handsome. He was just breathtakingly handsome. I had no idea what he would ever see in me. But he said, if I had $200, we'd go to Reno and get married tonight. And I went, oh my God, my heart absolutely stopped. I was terrified because I had never felt love or loved anybody, and here he was. I loved him more than life itself, and it was scary. And apparently he must have liked me too, I guess. I don't know. Bottom line, we drove off to Reno that night and got 2 traffic tickets before we got out of the state, and got married 28 days exactly. So it was in February. It was 28 days in February. Our marriage for the first year was so incredible. I mean, I would open a closet, and there would be china and crystal that he got when he was in the Navy, and beautiful things that I just never could afford or ever thought I would ever have. And this wonderful home, and this man that I loved, and my sons were happy, had a daddy. They were so excited. And so life was so good. Well, on our first anniversary, we went out to dinner, and he had bought a tavern in the meantime. He was in real estate, but in this tavern I was not real happy about because of my what had happened to me with alcohol. I just was opposed to it, but it was his dream to own his own business and be his own boss, and so he had bought this tavern. Well, after our anniversary dinner, he said, "Do you mind if we just stop by the tavern just to see how things are going?" Well, we did, and I was sitting back in the corner, and this barmaid was hanging all over Don and flipping her hair at him, and obviously just flirting with him. And it's like, men don't sometimes see this, or maybe they do, but they kind of like it. I don't know what was going on in his mind, but it was so obvious, and everybody was congratulating Dawn, and I sat there, and I just got a little angrier, and pretty soon she went up, and he was fixing her necklace, and I just lost it, and I got up and just ran out of the tavern down the street. It's pouring down rain, and this man stopped. He said, "Hey lady, you need help, and you want to ride?" And I said, "Sure." And I hopped in the car with a total stranger, and drove around. I'm crying, and pretty soon I stopped crying. He said, "Do you want to go home now?" And I said, "Yes." And he took me home. I said, "I think the man had to be an angel."
Yeah.
Something like that. So anyway, Don was just furious with me, and we had our first really big fight. And it was exactly 1 year, just like I had, propositioned with God back in Kansas City. Just give me 1 year of happiness of knowing and loving somebody. Well, this had actually been 1 year to the very day. And so after that, Don and I started kind of picking at each other, bickering. The tavern was not doing well, so financially we started to hurt, and the fighting escalated, and then maybe the boys might irritate him or whatever. It was just not good at all. And anyway, on our it was, as things continue just to disintegrate in our marriage, I thought back to that day in Kansas City, but not really, because I didn't really believe in God. Well, only worked one night a week at the tavern, and it was a promotional thing that we had. And so that was on April 6th, and I kissed the boys goodbye and headed there to go to work, and when I walked in the door, Don was leaning over the counter, just talking intently. And I couldn't figure out why, because it was so busy. Why is he working? Who was he talking to? And he hung up the phone, and he came and grabbed me by the arm and was pulling me out the door. And he said these words that just didn't resonate with me, that my son Mark had been hit by a car. So we got to the hospital, and we got there just as the ambulance pulled up, and they pulled Marky out of the ambulance, and he was so still and quiet. But I knew he would be okay. I just knew that. So we went into the hospital, and the doctor came out, how did this happen? How did this happen? And I said, I don't know how this happened. He was with a babysitter, and so the doctor left, and we were sat there hour after excruciating hour, and they came out and said, you better call a priest. And I said, I don't want to call a priest. I don't know a priest anyway. And just fix my son. I don't want a priest in there bothering them. But pretty soon the priest came and went into the room, and I knew what that meant, but I just no. And so time went by, and through the night, and I walked down the hallway and was looking out the window at the lights coming on in houses and people waking up to a new day, and thinking, how could this possibly be? How could they be, things be normal to these people, cars driving down the street? And Dawn was standing there with me, and I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I kind of knew what they were going to say, but I just couldn't even go there. And this doctor said, I'm sorry, but we weren't able to fix Mark, and we've lost him. And so we went into Marky's room, and he was cold, and I'm pulling the covers up over him, and I leaned down to kiss him, and saw a tear in his eye, and I kissed him, and I said, Marky, it's okay, mommy's here. It's like mommy couldn't fix anything. But I knew I couldn't. And then I just collapsed, and I really don't remember much after that, but I guess we left the hospital, and we were driving around in the car, and I couldn't bear to go home and see his clothes there. But I knew I had to tell Chris, his brother was with him when Mark was hit by the car, and left there when everybody ran to Mark. And so Chris had to walk home and tell the babysitter, and I just can't even imagine the pain that he had to go through. And so he came running to me, and he said, Mommy, did you hear what happened to Marky? And I said, I'm sorry, Chris, but the doctors weren't able to fix Mark. And he just stiffened out screaming and went to his room. And he never was the same after that. I mean, through psychologists and doctors and different things, but nothing could heal in him the pain that he had, and the pain that I had. And so after that, again, our marriage was not going well. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody. I just wanted to get through each day. I kind of sit in a chair staring out the window, and that was my life. After a few weeks of that, Dawn was saying to me, Kat, you have to get out of the house. You can't just do this. You need to get up, and you need to start trying to get out of this that you're in. And I was just furious. I said, I'll never get out of this. I didn't want to. And I remember these two little nuns from a church nearby came by to tell me about Jesus Christ, and how my son was with him now. And I screamed at them. I said, I'll tell you about your Jesus. Your Jesus kills little children. And I slammed the doors in their faces, and sit down the other side, just, screaming out in hatred of any God, that anybody believed in. I just did not. And I, at that point, was a total atheist. I hated even the mention of God. Don't even mention that around me, or I would climb all over somebody. And so then Don told me one night, we're going to go out tonight. We hadn't been out of the house. I hadn't been out of the house in weeks. And he said, we're going over to our friend's house, and you need to do this. You need to get out away from the house. And so I was kind of arguing with him, and we started walking out the door to go. And I was telling him, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I can't smile. When I smiled, I just felt this horrible guilt. Moms aren't supposed to let their kids die. And I had done that, and the guilt was just overwhelming. So we got in the car and we started bickering and fighting with each other. And down the street we went, and Don said the words to me, you need to move on. And it was like a match going into gasoline. I just blew, and I came across the seat at him, just striking him in the face and clawing him. I'll never move on. I'll never move on. I was just furious. And he took his arm and went like this as hard as he could to protect himself from this wild woman. And it knocked me over to the other side of my car. And I just, I just slowed down. And I said, take me home, which he did. And when we got in the house, I grabbed the car keys, and I was mad. And I ran out the door, hopped in the car, and he ran out the door screaming at me. And I just took off. And I felt this pain inside of me, but I didn't know if it was, if I was physically hurting or if my heart was breaking. I really didn't know. And I just kept driving, and it was pouring down rain again. And I pulled over the side of the road because the pain got so severe, and I undid my clothes, and I'm soaking wet. And I knew I have to get back home. Something's really bad wrong with me. And I slid back. I don't even know how I got back home, but when I drove up the driveway again, Don was at the door furious with me. And I kind of crawling up the driveway, all bent over and soaking wet, and my clothes all undone. And I said, I got past him, and he said, where are you going? And I said, I need to call an ambulance. I need to get to a hospital. And he said, well, I'll take you to the hospital. And he was just angry. And so we got in the car, we went to the hospital, and I'm laying in the bed there, and the doctors came in and asked me where I got the bruise on my back. And I didn't want to tell them my husband hit me. He's not a wife beater. He's a really great guy. And I thought if something does happen to me, will they arrest him? What will happen? So I told them I didn't know. And they said, well, we suspect you have internal bleeding. We're talking back in the 60s, and they didn't have MRIs or CAT scans back then. So they just could go by my blood count or blood pressure or whatever. And they said, we need to take you into surgery right away and find out something's wrong. And we went into surgery, and they were wheeling me down the hallway into surgery, and they stopped the gurney, and Don leaned over and kissed me and told me that he loved me. And I thought, I didn't even think he liked me anymore, let alone loved me. So it was so wonderful. I just clung to that vision when we went into surgery, and the doctors were there with masks leaning over me and all, and I knew things should be getting dark and I should be going under, but for some reason I knew everything that was going on, and they did fade away, and it got very, very dark, but I still was aware of the chatter of the emergency room. And then it got very quiet, and I started moving through that darkness and out the other side into what appeared to be a hallway. And I remember looking down, seeing my other two sons and Don standing by a lamp pole, and they were crying because I had died. And I told them, no, I'm fine. I'm okay. I didn't die. I'm okay. And then I moved on, and I saw 4 human figures standing off to the left, dressed in street clothes. I knew they weren't angels or anything. I don't even know at that point I knew I was dead, but I didn't really know what was going on. And I floated past them, and they had these really concerned looks on their faces, like something was drastically wrong. And I just, I didn't know who they were. I didn't see Mark, my son, and he had died. So I don't know to this day, who those people were, whether they were distant relatives or what, but they looked very, very concerned for me, and I didn't understand that. And then I went past them, and then all of a sudden I heard this horrendous noise, like a freight train was coming right down on top of me. And I felt this burning, pulling rope or whatever pulling through my chest, 100 million miles an hour, just pulling and burning, and this horrendous noise. And then it just stopped. And the thought came to me, there is no God. And then all of this happened. And then it stopped, and I knew that God existed. And I can't tell you how I knew, but I knew, just like if I put my hand out here, that's my hand, and nobody's going to convince me that that's not my hand. That's the truth. And I knew that God existed. I knew that I knew that I knew that I knew that God did exist. And I was excited because, you know, I there was somebody in control of all this mess. So I was excited. And then I started moving on again, and I heard the same noise, and I thought to myself, you know, there is no heaven, and this noise, like a train running over me, and then pulling through my chest, and then it stopped, and I knew heaven was a real place, heaven existed. And I saw beyond me that this brilliant light was being held back by a door or some kind of structure, but I was moving towards it, and I knew I was going to heaven, and I was so excited. Now, this feeling that I had, this peace that absolutely was beyond anything I'd ever felt in my life, this extreme euphoria of peace and any good feeling that you can possibly have, had encompassed me from the time that I knew God existed to the point where I knew I was going to heaven. And it was so strong that even knowing I was leaving my family, knowing they would be okay, I was so excited. I could leave my family. I could leave everything on earth. Going towards this was the most beautiful, I can't even describe it. I can't, so it's hard to even try, but it was incredible. And the feeling that you could leave all of that behind and move into this for eternity was weird, but I know that they're right behind me. I knew that. And then the bottom just dropped out. I was almost there. The bottom dropped out, and I started falling into total darkness. And I knew I was falling into hell. And I was, of course, terrified. And there was no lake of fire, no demons, nothing, just total blackness. And I was feeling the pain of burning, but I didn't see any flames because of the fact that it was so totally dark, totally void of anything. And I was screaming out to God. I knew I was in hell. And I knew God hadn't sent me there. I knew that my blasphemy against God, I didn't want to believe in God. I screamed against God. I screamed, you know, leave me alone. Just if you do exist, which I didn't believe he did. You know, I don't want no part of anything that has to do with God. So that was my doing. My going into hell was my fault, not God's. And I was screaming out to God, please forgive me. I believe in you. Please forgive me and take me from this place. Now, the total separation from everything is a horrible, horrible thing. I mean, separation from God, who could be in control of everything or anything, but you're falling into total darkness. Nobody knows you ever existed, not even God. You're going to fall and burn in there forever and ever and ever. You're not going to hit bottom. You're not can't commit suicide. You can't make it stop. You're going to be there for eternity, forever and ever and ever. And I knew that, but I was wrong. Thank God. I was screaming out to God to forgive me. And you know, there could be a lot of different places in hell. There could be the lake of burning fire, or where they talk about, or other people who have seen demons, and possibly if I'd have gone further, that would have happened, but it didn't. Mine was mostly just the total absence of anybody knowing I ever existed. I had ceased to exist. And so as I was crying out to God, I felt myself kind of coming backwards, back out of that, back into the tunnel, coming forward across what I had, where I had been. And then I heard a voice say to me, bring people to me. And I knew it was the voice of God. And I felt my spirit enter back into my body. And I don't know how to explain that either, other than when I believe that we are spiritual beings, and that when we die, our spirit leaves this flesh and blood body that rots, and the older we get, the more we see that happening. But thank God we could leave it, and that we leave, but our spirit lives on, and it lives on for eternity. And so I felt my spirit come back into my body, and as that did, and the voice saying, "Bring people to me," then I came back out of this into the operating room again. And I was screaming at that point, "There is a God, there is a God." And then, they put me back under again, and and went into the recovery room, and I was screaming to Dawn, I died, there is a heaven, there is a God. And that was over 55 years ago, and I am still as screaming the same thing to everybody I can run into, any podcast I can get on to. There is a God, there is somebody in control of all this big mess. So but so stay right with him, and what is the path to God? I can't really say that your path is your path to God, but follow it and know that he does exist is so important, so important. And for those who doubt about hell, I did too, but it's real. It's real. I mean, if there's, it just makes sense. If there's good in this world, that it's counterbalanced with bad. Everything has a balance to it. And so there is a God, and there is evil. We see evil in this world, and what happens to that? If of course, if they knew they were going to hell, would they be like that? Probably not. But Satan was the strongest angel in heaven, and Lucifer, and he thought he could be as God, and he took a third of the angels with him. So even people that were where I was at, they believe they can become as God. So I just makes sense. So there is hell, there are evil spirits trying their best to pull people down with them. So whatever I can say, your path to God, please follow it. And it's a very important thing. So that's my story. and I'll keep screaming until I die.
There you go. Right. And yeah, when they came back, I always say I'm the unwilling messenger. In the sense that, they're like, do we have to keep calling you back about speaking and being authentic in your truth of your experience?
One thing I did want to say is that, I'm not special, because this happened to me, and maybe somebody else doesn't have a near-death experience, and I hope you don't have to go through that. But that's what it took for me to come to God, and I'm not special. So I believe that we all have the opportunity, some people even when the dying process. So if you've had a loved one say that they didn't know God, they hated God or whatever, it's possible that during the dying process that they went through the same thing I did and had that opportunity to receive God as their savior. And so that's important to know.
Mm-hmm. Very. And I was going to ask you about that, how our perceptions change. Because before you said like you were Gnostic, we had talked about probably prior to this, and then you went atheist, and then your experience, you fully, embrace God. And I find that so remarkable in the sense that God loves us all. The opportunity is always there. But my question for you, because I have different people that talk about it, my understanding of the void is that absence of God, like that absence of light that you were in, that darkness where nothing exists, and then I call like the fires, are the cleansing fire of all that earthly baggage and that hate, all those things that are not of God. Because to me, God is like pure love. And I was just curious, like when you were in that space, is that how you felt? Like that you were like totally disconnected from that light of his love?
Absolutely. Like I say, I felt like I was non-existent. Nobody even knew of that I lived, was there, or there was just totally alone, and not even God knew it. But I was wrong. I mean, but God did know I was there. But there was total absence from anything or anybody. and nobody could throw a rope over the top and save you. No, I said, no, but no 911, nothing. So if
Nothing but yourself.
nobody knows you're there, how could they come after you? So it's a horrible, horrible feeling. It was just awful and not describable really, but awful.
No. So, like people, when they say that they have connected and had that experience, they feel like this indescribable sense of love and light that just like hugs them. I know that was the truth from my experience. So as soon as you like recognized and called out to that, did you feel like it enveloped you? Like you just felt this huge wave of love of your creator?
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel that even today sometimes in my time of meditation or worship to the Lord, I can get to that place again of that exhilarated feeling. Like probably not 100%, but it's enough to just really push me on. And I think that's a big thing. I think that worshiping our creator is something that he wants. And I love that. I love that. I do it a lot of times just with songs of music that just, especially if I'm alone, and turn it up real loud and just bring myself there. And it's incredible. And so living with that is great. Yeah.
So you're able to call on that. I always call it, that divinity within you that when in those moments that you need it. Like, do you find that like, because the integration process after that, I always find interesting as well. Like, how did you integrate that whole switch in perception in your life? I mean, like when you were confronted with different situations where maybe you didn't want to be loving, or before you wouldn't have been, did you see it totally different? Like, did you see it from like the way you would want like God to see you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I changed drastically. So here I was, this kind of bitter, angry person that shut away to being this outgoing, vibrant, there is a God. I mean, I just changed so dramatically. And what God had asked me to do would bring people to him. Well, who am I? I mean, I didn't know how to do that. I knew nothing about religion or faith in God. And so I would go out and say things and tell people what happened. And I just scared a bunch of people. I didn't bring anybody to God or bring anybody to Christ. And so it was like, I did start going back to church and it was a Catholic church because I didn't know any better. My mom was a Catholic. And so I went to mass every single day. And then I one day just felt a voice saying that I needed to go on to a church where I could learn more about God. And I did, and went to a church where they taught scripture in the Bible. And it was all new to me. But the way I read the Bible, and anybody can do this, whether you believe in the Bible or not, doesn't matter. It's a great book of wisdom and history and different things. So even if you don't want to believe in Christianity, but open the Bible up in the New Testament, and see if it doesn't speak to you, because I haven't done that so many times. I'll read a few, chapter, and there is something there that I needed to hear. It's really weird. So, and I underline, my Bible's like a diary. I mean, it's all written up and messed up and yeah. So, that it's really a great way to know God. And, for whatever reason, whether it's inspired by God, which Christianity believes, or whether it's just a bunch of wise men that wrote it. I don't care what you believe. It's history. And it's great wisdom and a good thing. So I changed drastically, and everybody I know either bought into it and still liked me, or they stayed away from me.
I was just going to ask you that, like how your relationship shifted. I find that's like the hardest part of integrating this, because they still are seeing you in your old storyline, like who you were, and they're like, who is this person? It's like you're a total, it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like who are you and what did you do with them? I mean, did you get that kind of when you came back?
Yeah, what I didn't, Don, my husband, went right along with it. I drug him into the Catholic Church. We paid all this money to get our marriage blessed and all. And nope, we're not going here. We're going to this other church. And he went along with it, because he believed, I guess, what I'd been through. And my
Uh,
kids, my sons, they're very much believers in Christ, and my oldest son is even professing Christ and has gone on podcasts. And he went through a horrible time. I mean, watching his brother die like that had such a traumatic effect. And he went through drugs and alcohol, was in a 1%er biker club, and different things that he came out of finally, and now does ministry into these biker clubs where he can go in and because they'll talk to him, and he's a great guy, So my whole family and my immediate friends around me, I have a circle of very strong Christian friends, and a couple of them that keep me in line, because I'll sometimes get off track here. And so I keep people around me that I can trust, that I can go to when I have issues of my faith, and who help build me up. And I've got my other friends I go out and have a glass of wine with, and play golf with, and have fun with. And so, and they all know my story, every single one of them. And even the partying golfer friends, I mean, they believe me, and they like me still, I think. So anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, I am who I am. And so I feel that I, even though I've had this experience, am accepted just as a person.
See, that's so beautiful. There's a lot of people that struggle with that or lose their whole support system, and they just don't know where to turn. And I've always said, I say spirit and God, but is to, remove anyone from my picture that isn't for my highest good, and the highest good of, where my journey is headed, And so I always trust that, like, if somebody moves out of my sphere, then they're not in that space with me, because I can, like
Yeah,
you, that authenticity. I wanted to thank you for your authenticity, in the sense that, you are a beautiful divine creation, and you can't be any different than who you are,
that's right.
and that's just how it is. And so I love that you step into that, and your whole experience, in that sense that you are a messenger. Now, they said, you said something about, God said, bring them to me. Was that right? And I'm just curious, like, how do you see that in your storyline, as far as how do you bring that to fruition? By speaking for these podcasts, I know you do that as well. Do you feel it's like that you bring God's love to people? Like, you're a living example of that?
Yes. I mean, like I say, when I first started, I had no idea what to do. I educated myself in ways to do that. God said, bring people to me. Well, how do you do that? Well, you do it through example, for one thing. I mean, you're not going to be able to tell anybody anything unless they like you somewhat, or they trust you. And I think being a good friend to people is important, that nobody is more important than the other guy. They don't have to look a certain way, or they don't have to have money, or they don't have to have this or that. A human soul is no more important, this one than the other one. And there's, God does not judge people in any way, shape, or form. So that's been my attitude. Before this happened, I would always want to sit next to the popular person. Now it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. Now I can sit with anybody and then just feel comfortable and understand who they are. So I think that being a good friend, being a good person in that way, knowing everybody's importance to God, and that might be a one soul that could be one to Christ. And quite frankly, I don't believe it's in my power that I bring people to God. I believe God sets it up. I mean, certainly, and that I'm trying in a human way to pull them through. Here's a bridge.
Yes.
Here's a bridge. Walk over me.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's interesting, because my one reverend friend always says, he's a bridge walker. He makes that bridge between the divine, the divine and the humanity of it, and I think
Yeah.
that's so beautiful, to be that bridge.
Uh-huh.
So I just was wondering, when you really touched on that with me, as far as, I always say something along the lines of, like, don't judge the person, like, don't judge the divinity, by the person, You know,
Mhm.
some of the most beautiful people I've met, most people might not ever speak to, but in their core, they get it all, and they know that divinity.
Yeah.
And you know, you're always missing out if you're judging that, you know, book by its cover, so to speak. I mean,
No, I know.
yeah,
That's so true.
and it's kind of like that, you know. And so I'm just curious, like, this is another thing I find with people, also though, is when you came back, did you see like the divine in everyone, like in the sense that, like, sometimes you want to see them from pure love and from that state, forgetting that they have this very human reactions and triggers and things that, you know, may not be as pretty. You know, it's kind of like love them where they're at. Did you have a lot of that where, like, you trusted maybe, or you know, saw so much in them, and that expectation kind of just created a dissonance, you know, like, you know, you saw who they are and who they could be, and then trying to meet them where they're at. Was that kind of hard for you?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to say no. I think people that really were adverse to me, and I see it more on these podcasts by the comments. Occasionally, I'll get somebody that doesn't like what I said, or will, you know, they'll say things, but then and it's strange. You have 50 people that love it, and one person that says bad. You focus on that bad one, but that doesn't happen to me anymore. I understand the pain in people, and so. I don't really find it a lot in the flesh where people will say things to me, or I don't believe that, or you're crazy, or whatever, are you on drugs, you know. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I had looked into when I had this was, could it have been an hallucination from the drugs and all that? Well, Dr. Bruce Grayson, he's a founding father of near-death experiences, studied him his whole entire life. I was one of his first patients there, and he has studied me over 20 some years, 25 years, and is a good friend. He wrote about me in his book Alive. And anyway, he can tell you exactly scientifically why these are not hallucinations, why they are not drug induced, why they are not dreams, why they're not all these things that people come up with. And that's all explained in his book, and somewhat in my book too. So so those people that don't believe, don't want to believe, I was there, I was I was the one telling people, I don't go for that, get out of my house. And so I do understand them, and I pray for them. I pray for them.
Yeah, and you get a lot of, you know, it depends upon the platform, but yeah, you do get some of that kind of feedback, and I can totally relate to that. I think, you know, and do you find too, like you were saying, and you touched on it earlier, and I thought that maybe that's a really good topic, where I always say you don't have to die to learn to live. That's like the book I'm working on, you know, that people sometimes get almost envious of people who have these spiritually transformative experiences. Like, well, I didn't have that, so how should I know? You know, when I always say the divine is within you. If you sit with yourself long enough, you'll find it, you know. I was just wondering if you ever deal with that, where people are like, well, you can have that faith because you've been there, you know, like that not a disbelief, but more like, you know, why are you different, you know?
Right. Yes. I don't get a lot of that, but I'm sure people may think it. And I do try to tell people that I am not special, that I think that everybody goes through what I went through during the dying process. I went through a process because I was dying and was clinically dead, according to doctors. But we all go through that dying process. So people may not ever know Jesus Christ, or may not know God until they go through that. Whatever faith or whatever thing you believe in, it's going to come to you in the dying process. And it's too bad it can't come to everybody beforehand. Why we got a little peek at it, I don't know why, because I really don't know why. Because I was not a churchgoer, I was not a believer, I was not a nice person. But yeah, and why some go through this and others don't, I really have no idea. But we have been given a gift, and I think most of us come forward with it. Our lives change dramatically for most of us. Yeah.
My theory sometimes in hearing these and from my own experiences is that you got to that point of surrender. Like I've suffered too much in a soul type of way that I you need that healing, so to speak. Like, you
Mm.
know, my understanding sometimes when I hear these is like it's that's why I always ask the progression, like what brought you there. 'Cause if you look, a lot of times with near death experiences, not all, but they were in a point where like I just can't, as a soul, you're just like, I can't move on any farther. So it's like, it's almost like a cleansing to go so that you can move forward in your experience. Like, I took on too much of this pain, and I need you to walk beside me now, as far as God. I just was wondering if you can see that within your story, that like I got to a point where I was just so filled with this suffering that you know that God reached out to me. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, and a lot of people go through that. I did. I attempted suicide 3 different occasions. One time with a loaded gun to my head, and John just came in and took it away from me. And the other time I took a bunch of sleeping pills and I slept for 2 days and had a terrible hangover. And the third time I was on a ledge, third-story ledge on a hotel, and I took the screen out, sitting out on the ledge. And I just knew if I just went an inch further, all this pain would be gone. I looked down, it's so easy. It'll all be gone. Just one more inch. And as I started to scooch forward, I saw a vision of my son, Chris, come straight at me, saying, "Mommy, don't." And I fell backwards and, you know, that was the end of that. But I understand that terrible pain, and so many people aren't dumb enough to try to commit suicide, but it was such a horrible thing. And my thought came, what would have happened to Chris if I had done that? He lost his father, he lost his brother, and now his mother does something like that. So yeah, my heart goes out to suicide survivors and people that are related to them. The pain, like you're talking about, is so great, and certainly I felt that to the point of wanting to die. But if I really wanted to die, I would have done it, and somehow
Right.
almost did. But that horrible pain that you're talking about, and I'm sure you've got listeners out there right now that are suffering that. And there's a lot better ways to take care of it than suicide, where you're hurting other people, not yourself, and different horrible things that we go through in life, which is so sad. But hang on, you'll get through it. Look what you've done, and look what I've done, and turn to God. I mean, you don't have to go through all this to know God. You really don't. You really don't, but it does take a lot of perseverance and a lot of pushing forward. Yeah.
I feel some of us are just really stubborn. Like it takes a lot to say, hey, I need something outside of myself.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and I need that hand. And it's that like that love and trust that, you know, somebody is there to catch in those moments. And that's what I feel like I say divinity does for me, like
Um,
I know I am always lifted up. I'm always safe. I'm always loved, and and supported in the journey of expansion that we call being human. And it's like, being away from that love, it was difficult at first. But then I realized that we can have that love here if we see it in each other and be that mirror,
mm,
you know. And so, to me, I love your message about like bring them to me in that sense, like you said that you were being by example.
mhm.
Do you feel like that is a way to see the divine, in the sense that when you are doing all those loving acts, that is flowing through you?
Oh, I don't really think about that much. I think about my relationship with God a lot, and I want to do the right things, and I don't know that I always do, and my human self gets in the way, but I try so hard each day to let God's will be done and to be that example of him living through me, not and putting me down, let God come through me. And I do that prayer before I come on podcasts like this, or if I run up against a person that is questioning or having issues, my mind quickly goes, God, you take over here. You take over, because I'm not going to have the right words.
Right. I often feel like, there's a part of me that like steps aside and it just flows through me.
Right.
Because I've been in that space of that love, and it just flows through me when people are brought to me, like, so I feel that that's, how we're kind of messengers. Like, he knows that we're here and we are open and of service, and he just flows that, what you would call probably his flock to you, that needs that message in the appropriate time, in the appropriate space.
Yeah.
And that's how I call like being the messenger. I don't
Yes.
seek people out to tell my story. You either resonate with it or you don't. But the fact that we're even here proves there's some form of creation, right? So
Right. Right.
I love that that's how you bring forth your message. So I really appreciate that. Now, you had mentioned your son, and I think, from his story even, and yours, it's always showed me that, we go through these trials and tribulations and rise higher through them so that we can reach others who are still in that darkness, like to be
Yes.
that ladder to bring them back to their own divinity. Would you see that when you look at the pattern of like your life and your son's life? Like, he would never be brought into that circle to reach those type of people if he hadn't had the path he got there from. It's so interesting to look back how everything was kind of divinely orchestrated. Do you see that in your life and just how that plays out?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my son was in a biker gang, a biker club, he calls them. And I didn't know if he was going to live or die. He had alcohol poisoning to the point he's hospitalized, and drug addiction and all these things. And to see him today, it is, God made that transformation, and he knows that. And it's so beautiful. And for those who have children that are way out there, what better example to them to have a parent that is a God-loving person. And you can keep praying for those kids. I sure did. I had to finally tell my son, please don't call me or be around me if you're going to be drinking or on drugs. I can't take it. You're hurting me too much. And so he wouldn't. And we went through a lot of years of real pain, but never gave up on him, never once, and loved him unconditionally through the whole thing, but could not stand to have him to see it. So he was gracious enough to at least do that. But he's such a great guy now, such a great guy. We're real buddies because we've been through this together.
Right, because you've grown and expanded that path together.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, though, that I think a lot of people go through. Like, they love at that level, but the person may not be in a state where it's healthy to be around them. And I think your message is very important, that that's okay. You can still love and support them, but you don't have to support the behaviors or
Absolutely.
be involved with that. But can you just explain? I mean, I bet you that, especially as a mother, was really hard for you. Like, can
Yeah.
you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, I had lost one son already, and so to
Right.
lose this other son was absolutely horrible. I mean, we had to ask him to leave our home because he was so destructive, self-destructive, and in any ways destructive to friends and neighbors and people. So we put a list down. Chris, this is what is our home. We love you and we want you here, but you cannot do these things and live here and do drugs and alcohol and blah, blah, blah. And gave him the list. And he said, you're either going to live by this list or leave. And he said, well, I'm going to leave. So he left. And as he walked out the door and up the hill, my heart broke once again, like he had died. And that went on for a year or so. And people would come and throw his stuff in our yard and say, your son is blah, blah, blah. And we said, yeah, we know. And give him his stuff and off he'd go again. And anyway, he came back in about a year and said, okay, well, I'm ready to follow the rules. I'd like to go into the Navy, and they have a program where you can have help if you're on drugs. And he went in, and the only help they gave him was pulling him out of line and testing him. And, so it was tough for him, I'm sure. But he did come out of that still with alcohol and drug problems somewhat, but a better man. And pretty soon, I don't know how he did it, but he got off the drugs and the alcohol, and he still was. And then he was still in the biker clubs, but he changed from that into a Christian biker club. And he found a church, Tribe of Judah, and they changed him. They brought him to Christ, and not me. And it was wonderful. And so now he's reaching out.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Back home, I was involved with Bikers for Christ, and they do amazing things,
Yeah.
And so that's really, really cool that he is able, to be that person in that community for them, and, and just speak the will of God.
Yeah.
My friend likes to say, wield the will that is holy. And I think when you speak these messages of transformation, it gives that hope that that's available for everyone. I mean, I think that's a very good message that you keep saying, that you can find this too, if you just see and feel and search. Because like you said, you when you first came back from your near-death experience, that you searched through a lot of scripture, right? And were there various religions that you looked through, or was it mostly just through like the Christian literature?
I went right back to Christian. I had searched all the religions before,
Really?
and I never really found anything that really resonated. And of course, Christianity didn't either. But because that's what I probably knew best, that's where I was drawn. And then I was drawn into further teachings and better teachings and knowing more. But when I first picked up the Bible, it was like Greek to me. I thought, why'd they write a New Testament? Wasn't the Old Testament good enough? And what are all these numbers about? And it was just crazy. But I kept trying to read it, but I learned how to read it. I mean, there's a way to read the Bible. It's picking up as an atheist. And opening it up was like, nope, I don't understand any of this. So, but in going to these other churches where they taught from the Bible, then I was able to see how the Word of God could speak to you. And I learned to do that myself pretty soon. And now that's where I go. If I got a problem or an issue, it's there. The answer's there. And so it was a process.
Yeah, and some say that's like divine bibliomancy, where you open it up and you're given exactly what you need. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And do you find that with the scriptures, I'm just curious, because you said you study them, like, to me they're more like a spiritual analogy or a metaphorical, in like, if you take it too literal, you're missing like the whole energy behind it.
And
How
that's
do you
where
see it?
we find a great deal of issues and problems in faith-based things because of that, because of people's or human interpretation of the scriptures. And I don't care how high up someone is in the faith, in the Christian faith, they still are interpreting it from what they've been taught or what they really feel, and that may not be right for you. And so I question a lot of the stuff in Christianity. I really do. And I pray to God to help me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to, and I don't really speak out a lot about that, but I do feel that you really need to read the Bible and read scripture as asking God to reveal to you what's needed in you. And, you know, is Jesus Christ the only way to come to heaven, to get to heaven, which Christianity teaches? This is what I have a problem with that so much. So then I say, well, who is Jesus Christ? Who is he? You know, well, he's the Son of God. Okay, I can believe that. And he came here to earth to help us with to cleanse us from our sins. I can believe that too. Who else would go through what he went through unless he was a total nutcase, you know? And he wasn't.
No.
So, you know, these things I see, well, could Jesus Christ, could he really be something else? Could Jesus Christ, be somewhere else for somebody else? And I kind of believe that. You know, so anyway, there's a lot that goes into your understanding of scripture. And like I say, I keep around me there's probably 3 people that I really trust in the faith. And so I don't get off base.
Right.
Both of them.
And I just thought that's why I wanted to bring it up to you, because there is so much taught that is like what I call like Christian literalism, you
Yeah,
know. And for me, when I say to feel divine, you have to feel. It's a matter of feeling. It's not an intellectual thing, you know.
yeah,
It's like get out of your own head and feel what that feels like. To me, when I had my experience, they told me like it's like I call it light code, but like, you know how like there's the Da Vinci Code, there's a divine code in all of those writings that like if you feel into it, you will see and know the word of God, you know.
right,
And so I think that's so important because so many people are searching for a path, like what's right for them. And I think that's an intuitive knowing, like you were just saying, like feel it.
right,
And we've all searched different paths. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because when I look through them, the ones that I have seen, you can see the divine throwing through all of it. There's so many similarities just said in different words, in different time periods, different things,
yeah,
you know. And you know, if I'm a creation, you know, and like I call Jesus Yeshua, but you know, as far as he says, you are my brothers and sisters, correct? So therefore, it flows through all these religions, all these places in time. You know, it's feeling that divinity in the flow, so to speak, for
right,
me. And I just didn't know, you know, I'm glad you talked about that because sometimes when near-death experiencers say God, people get that whole breakdown of what like either Christian God or different gods. And I just feel it's important to say what you were saying, like feel it out. It's not as literal as that or a
right.
one-way path. I mean, so when you talk about God, is that how you see it? Like that this it's this all-encompassing being that we're a part of no matter what paths we walk.
Right, pretty much so. You know, some of the things that I hear, because God is not the center of it, I don't believe in, you know.
Yeah.
But again, to each his own. I'm not going to judge anybody's faith in God or whatever. But if it isn't God centered, I have a problem with it. You know, in some way, it has to be God centered. So
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Like, yeah, I mean, I think there are some where I've noticed it's like a breakdown of the I call it the pantheon. You know, like it would be like the different, some of them, they break it into different aspects of God. That's how I see it. Like, you know, where there's like this God and then there's these gods, you know, and that's
right,
their whole belief. I think they're just looking at different aspects of the same divine being. They're just kind of breaking it into different personality complexes almost of the one divine, you know, as far
yeah,
as those multi godheads or things like that, because all of it is created by one, what I call prime creator, you know. And
yeah,
so I you know, religion is not a subject I ever get into, but I just wanted to point that out because so many I feel are conflicted about all of that or what it means to them. And I guess, you know, my thing with it is that's part of your expansion. Whatever you're called to at the time, you know, just let that divine flow through you and follow that, you know, to see where it leads you to, because everything leads back to source. God, whatever term you want to use, we all use different terms, I think, and are saying or trying to say the same language of that
Yeah,
divinity, you know. Um, so I was just really interested in your theory because that people just look at it differently, but we're all connected in that same God source, you know.
pretty much so. I mean, I've heard people say that we are God. I don't
Mhm.
believe that at all. God help us if that's true. You know?
Right? I always say, like, if Jesus is the son of God, and he's a piece of God, and if we're his brothers and sisters, like, but to me it's that divine spark within you. So that's where some people say, we are all God, in that sense, because we carry that divine spark, but it doesn't mean we created everything and anything. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Because yeah.
I just feel like
So
Jesus Christ either is who he said he was, or he was the biggest fake and phony that was ever created, right? I
right,
mean,
right. The snake oil salesman.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
no. Yeah, I mean, and the things, and some of the studies I've had, where they're like, yes, they say, Jesus was a real person, but not everything attributed to him did he do. It was a collection of these very knowledgeable, wise men who created this whole thing. And still, that doesn't take away from it, like you were saying, because that's divine wisdom. It doesn't
Right.
matter who carried it. We all carry some of it, I think, from our experiences and just being a part of that love. So I just found that really interesting that you had said that.
Mhm.
So my other thing is, I was just curious, with everything that you do, what projects are you working on? I mean, what is it that drives you, through that experience and to get your message out there?
Well, I found one of the best ways to get the message out is what I'm doing right now, and that's these podcasts. So thank you very much for asking me. And I have done a lot of things, speaking for groups when I'm asked, and but a lot of times I feel like I'm just preaching to the choir, because that people that would come to
Right.
an event like that already don't need to, So amongst my friends, everybody knows what I'm all about. My golf friends they're wild and crazy. They're so much fun.
I
But
love
they call me the church lady, and I'm not. But when I
that.
miss a putt or something, and I say a word I shouldn't say, they say, oh, the church lady. So I'm constantly under the eye. But getting God's word out the way that it's through these social media is huge, and such a blessing to be able to come on programs like this and tell my story. And I wrote my book to carry on when I'm not here. And my son, he's able to use it in his ministry as well. And so yeah, it's just being who I am. And I think God brings people to us. I have people coming to me a lot because I am the church lady.
Right.
Yeah, they know I'm not. I mean, it's just a big
I
joke,
know.
but
Right.
anyway, they do come to me when they're hurting and have questions, and they know they're safe with me, and that's huge. And my son's friends and my husband's friends, anywhere, just
Yeah.
in the grocery store, I do have these feelings of people that you run into. Just there's a reason why I just bumped into this lady and start talking with somebody, and boom.
Yeah, and one of the messages I got, what I pray in that is that you're in the right space at the right time for souls. Like
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I, part of the reason and like the agreement to come back was to be that messenger. And I've noticed this. I mean, sometimes to the point of like, whoa, that's too crazy how that all lined up. And now I had a laugh when you were saying that. Did you, my family's always like, there'll be people that'll just come up to me, and especially when the kids were little, they didn't get it. They're like, Mom, do you know that lady? Because I mean, like, they would literally just tell me their whole life story or whatever was on their mind that day. So when you came back from your experience, did you find that you like that was happening a lot? Like they were just drawn to you? Like you
Yeah,
were
I
supposed to be
mean,
there.
and I said that before, that we don't bring anybody to God. God sets the groundwork for us. So that's yes. I mean, he brings them to us, and you have to recognize those that he is bringing. But there are subtle signs that people are hurting, or they need a word or whatever. So yeah.
I always say like we're always that angel to someone else, from our experiences.
Yeah,
We
the
always
thought's
use
always there. The thought's always
yeah,
there.
yeah, to like, and that's the importance, I think, of sharing these stories. And like you said, you wrote it, so it's always out there, you
Mhm.
know, and somebody can find it if it needs it. So you're still being the angel long after you're gone,
Right.
right?
So
And you're like giving that message back to the
yeah.
people, and that's so beautiful. And now I just want to touch base is like from your experiences overall, the life you've lived and the experience after your experience, what would you say or want to say as your biggest like takeaway from that? Like what expanded you the most that you feel is a message that people need?
Oh. Um, that's hard to answer, because they need so much, but it depends on what they're looking for. I mean, if you have a strong faith in God, or and all, then you need to go to him, not to me. But I think overall it is that there is hope. If you're in a position right now where you're hurting over the death of somebody, you're hurting over a diagnosis of cancer, you're hurting over a child that's gone astray, you're hurting over the death of a loved one, all these things that we all go through, they're overwhelming. So if you don't have something in your life, if you don't have God in your life, it makes it almost impossible. But the message I have is, I don't think there's one thing that God could throw my way, and I don't mean to tempt God, I don't want it anymore, but that you
Right.
can't overcome or can't handle when you have God in your life. And I'm not saying that you just, okay, I believe in God. I'm talking about a daily walk with God, where you can feel him in your life. You can feel his direction. You feel the condemnation when you're doing wrong. You feel the elation when you're doing right. Be right with God. Be right. And that's what I tell a lot of my friends that are, get right with God, and then enjoy your life. Enjoy it.
I
So
call that being in the divine flow, like surrendering to
yeah,
be a service, to me it's like love or fear, or there's always that choice that you want to which do you want to live in, as far as when you
yeah,
do everything from a place of love, I feel like abundance flows, like everything comes in, and you're in that, you know that divine space. It's a matter of like choosing where you want to be and what you want to be in the world, right?
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
It's not all about going to church every day. And it's not all about being in the Bible every day. It's all about relationship. It's
Yeah.
not religion, it's relationship.
Yes.
So,
Beautiful. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And having that relationship, because I feel when you have those loving relationships, you're being, you're personifying that same love. You're in
Yes.
that space. Very
Yep.
beautiful. Thank you. That is so true. That is so true. And I think that's just more what we have to keep in mind when we're connecting with other people. That'll do unto others what you want unto you, because, ever since my experience, I see it in that what I call the 360 view. I see it how and where people are hurting and how they're presenting from that place of hurt and pain. I don't take it personally. you
Right.
know it's not directed at me. And like you said, a lot of them, and even in your time, directed at God. Like, what God would do this, kind of
Right,
thing, instead of looking in that accountability and responsibility of where your life got to this point. He's loved you through it all,
right.
Yeah. So I just think that's a beautiful message. So thank you. So
Mm.
I just want to say, is there anything else that your soul is calling to speak before we wrap this up today, as far as your feelings about all that you've experienced?
Well, I'm glad that I found God in my life. I'm so grateful, and I hope that even one person who is doubting right now could, converse with us more if they want to, or will reach out at least to somebody and have that in their lives, and peace would come to all of you like it has to Lorelai and I myself. And this is a great way to live and a great way to die. So,
Right, exactly. Just to
yeah,
to be in that moment of that pure love is all of us hope for, I think, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right. Well, I thank you, Kat, so much for being here today and speaking your truth and just being out there, being authentic and letting people feel what you felt.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really appreciate that. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
And so if you want to connect with Kat or read more of her story, it'll be down below in the description. We thank you again for joining us today at Spirit inSight. So much love to you.